If you are a man over 60, listen very carefully to this. The biggest mistake older men make today is not losing money, not losing their health, and not even ending up alone. It is allowing the wrong woman to enter their life and quietly take away the very thing they spent decades working to build, their peace. That may sound harsh, and some people will disagree with it immediately, but stay with me until the end, because what we're about to discuss could save you years of stress, regret, and emotional exhaustion. Let's be honest about something most people are afraid to say. By the time a man reaches 60, life is no longer about chasing excitement, proving his masculinity, or trying to impress anyone. He has already lived through enough victories, disappointments, responsibilities, and sacrifices to know what truly matters. At this stage, the most valuable things a man owns are not found in his bank account. They are his peace of mind, his health, his freedom, his time, and the ability to wake up each day without unnecessary pressure. Yet, many senior men willingly place those things at risk the moment they enter a relationship. They believe companionship will automatically bring happiness, comfort, and fulfillment. Sometimes it does, but many times what begins as companionship slowly becomes obligation, expectation, and emotional strain. The tragedy is that most men don't notice it happening until the cost becomes impossible to ignore. And the first cost many older men pay has nothing to do with money. It begins with something far more draining: emotional exhaustion. The first reason many men over 60 should think very carefully before getting a girlfriend is something most people never talk about. Emotional labor becomes increasingly expensive as a man gets older. When you're younger, you have the energy to deal with misunderstandings, emotional ups and downs, constant communication, and the endless negotiations that come with many modern relationships. After 60, things change. Your priorities change. Your tolerance for unnecessary stress changes. Most importantly, your energy becomes a resource you can no longer afford to waste. After spending decades working, raising families, solving problems, paying bills, and carrying responsibilities, many older men reach a point where they no longer want chaos. They want simplicity. They want quiet mornings, predictable routines, and relationships that add comfort rather than complexity. Unfortunately, that is not always what happens when a girlfriend enters the picture. What often begins as companionship slowly turns into emotional responsibility. You find yourself managing feelings, resolving conflicts you never created, offering constant reassurance, and carefully choosing your words to avoid unnecessary tension. Little by little, the relationship begins demanding emotional energy that could have been spent on your health, your hobbies, your family, or simply enjoying your life. Many men don't recognize this process because it happens gradually. At first, the attention feels exciting. The conversations feel refreshing. Having someone interested in your life feels good, but as expectations increase, so does the pressure. Suddenly, your desire for solitude is questioned. Your independence is misunderstood. Your need for quiet becomes something you have to explain. And when a man reaches the stage where he must constantly manage someone else's emotions to protect his own peace, companionship can quietly become exhaustion. The problem is that emotional exhaustion rarely arrives alone. It often opens the door to another risk that many older men underestimate until it's too late: financial vulnerability. The second reason older men should be cautious about having a girlfriend after 60 is financial vulnerability. This is not about being selfish, cheap, or unwilling to share your success with someone you care about. It is about understanding that money means something very different at this stage of life than it did when you were 30 or 40. When you are younger, financial mistakes can often be corrected with time. You can work longer hours, start over, rebuild savings, or recover from poor decisions. After 60, the situation changes. Retirement income is often fixed. Savings have a specific purpose. Every dollar is supposed to support your health, your independence, your future security, and your ability to live comfortably without stress. What many older men fail to realize is that financial pressure in relationships rarely arrives all at once. It usually begins with small things: a dinner here, a weekend trip there, a gift for a birthday, an unexpected expense, helping during a difficult moment, or paying for things simply because you feel it's the right thing to do. None of these actions seem significant individually, which is exactly why they can be so dangerous. Over time, those small obligations become expectations. The relationship develops a financial rhythm, and many men continue spending not because they want to, but because they feel responsible for maintaining the relationship. Some even begin using money to keep the peace, avoid conflict, or preserve companionship they fear losing. What makes this especially risky is that loneliness can cloud judgment. A man who fears being alone may tolerate financial behaviors he would normally reject. He may ignore warning signs because the emotional comfort feels worth the cost. The problem is that when a relationship ends, the emotional pain eventually fades. Financial consequences often do not. And while money matters, there is something many older men value even more than money, something relationships can slowly take away without them noticing: their freedom. The third reason many men over 60 regret getting into relationships is the gradual loss of personal freedom. This is the one that often goes unnoticed because it doesn't happen overnight. There is no single moment where a man suddenly realizes he has lost control of his time. Instead, it happens little by little until one day he looks at his life and wonders why he no longer feels as relaxed as he once did. Before a girlfriend enters your life, your schedule belongs entirely to you. You wake up when you want, eat what you want, spend your afternoons however you choose, and enjoy your hobbies without explanation or negotiation. If you want to spend an entire day fishing, reading, golfing, traveling, or simply sitting in silence, nobody questions it. That freedom may seem ordinary, but after 60, it becomes one of the most valuable forms of wealth a man can possess. The challenge is that every relationship comes with expectations. Time must be shared, plans must be coordinated, decisions must be discussed. What once felt effortless now requires consideration of another person's needs, preferences, emotions, and schedule. Again, this may sound normal, because relationships have always involved compromise, but many older men underestimate how much energy that compromise requires. After decades of obligations to employers, spouses, children, and responsibilities, many men finally reach a stage where they can live life on their own terms. Giving up that independence often feels far more expensive than they expected. The irony is that some men enter relationships seeking greater happiness, only to discover they missed the freedom they had before. Freedom is not selfishness. It is the ability to live according to your own rhythm. And when that rhythm is constantly interrupted, frustration eventually follows. But there is another trap that is even more dangerous because it disguises itself as something positive. It is the difference between receiving attention and receiving genuine respect. One of the biggest psychological traps older men fall into is confusing attention with respect. At first glance, the two can feel almost identical. A woman shows interest in you, enjoys your company, compliments you, calls you regularly, and makes you feel wanted. After years of feeling overlooked, especially after retirement, divorce, or the loss of a spouse, that attention can feel incredibly rewarding. It reminds you that you are still seen, still desired, and still capable of attracting someone into your life. But attention and respect are not the same thing. Attention is easy to give. Respect is much harder to earn and even harder to maintain. Attention can disappear the moment circumstances change. Respect remains even when emotions fluctuate. Many older men become so grateful for attention that they stop evaluating whether the relationship is actually improving their lives. They focus on how the relationship makes them feel in the moment instead of looking at what it is costing them over time. This is why some men tolerate behavior they would have never accepted years earlier. They overlook red flags, ignore incompatibilities, and make excuses for situations that disturb their peace because they fear losing the attention they have become attached to. What begins as companionship slowly turns into dependency, and dependency is dangerous at any age. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe if you're enjoying this video. These conversations aren't always comfortable, but they can save years of frustration and regret. The wisest men understand that attention should never be the reason to keep someone in your life. What matters is whether that person genuinely respects your time, your boundaries, your values, and the life you've worked so hard to build. Unfortunately, many men only learn that lesson after loneliness has already influenced their decisions. Loneliness is another reason many older men find themselves entering relationships that ultimately cost them more than they gain. The difficult part is that loneliness does not always feel like loneliness. Sometimes it disguises itself as boredom. Sometimes it appears as an empty house, a quiet dinner table, or long evenings with too much time to think. Other times it shows up after retirement when the structure and purpose that once filled your days suddenly disappear. This is why loneliness can be so deceptive. It convinces a man that what he needs is a girlfriend, when what he may actually need is purpose, connection, and meaningful engagement with life. Those are not the same thing. A relationship can temporarily distract you from loneliness, but it cannot solve the deeper issues that created it in the first place. Many older men enter relationships hoping to fill an emotional void, only to discover that the void remains. The relationship becomes responsible for their happiness, their entertainment, and their emotional well-being. That is an impossible burden for any person to carry. When one individual becomes your primary source of fulfillment, disappointment becomes almost inevitable. The most fulfilled men over 60 understand something that many never learn. They build a life they enjoy before inviting anyone into it. They cultivate friendships, maintain hobbies, stay active, pursue interests, and create routines that give their days meaning. As a result, they don't need a relationship to rescue them from loneliness. And that changes everything. Because when you no longer need someone to complete your life, you become far more selective about who you allow into it. The problem is that many men never reach that point, and in their search for companionship, they overlook another danger that can affect not only their happiness, but also their physical health. One aspect of this conversation that rarely gets discussed is the physical cost of emotional stress after 60. When men are younger, they often believe stress is simply part of life. They deal with demanding jobs, financial pressures, family responsibilities, and relationship problems, then wake up the next day and keep moving forward. The body is more resilient. Recovery is faster. The consequences are easier to ignore, but after 60, the equation changes. The body no longer absorbs stress the way it once did. A sleepless night affects you more. Ongoing tension lingers longer. Constant emotional pressure begins showing up in places you cannot ignore. Blood pressure rises, sleep quality declines, energy levels drop. Even simple daily activities can feel more draining when your mind is carrying unnecessary burdens. This is why many older men eventually discover that protecting their peace is not simply a lifestyle choice. It becomes a health decision. Every argument, every emotional roller coaster, every cycle of conflict and reconciliation places a demand on the nervous system. What some people dismiss as normal relationship drama can quietly become a source of chronic stress. The irony is that many men spend decades working hard to improve their physical health only to allow emotional stress to undermine the very progress they have made. They exercise, eat better, attend medical appointments, and follow healthy routines, yet they remain connected to situations that constantly disturb their emotional balance. At this stage of life, health and peace are deeply connected. One supports the other. And when a relationship repeatedly disrupts both, a man must ask himself a difficult question. Is the companionship worth the cost? The answer often becomes clearer when we examine another hidden consequence many older men never see coming until it is already happening. Another hidden danger many older men overlook is the gradual loss of identity that can happen inside the wrong relationship. This is not something that happens overnight. In fact, it often happens so slowly that a man doesn't notice it until he realizes he no longer feels like himself. When a man is living alone, his routines reflect his true priorities. He spends his time how he wants. He follows habits that make sense to him. His decisions are guided by his values, his interests, and the lifestyle he has carefully built over the years. There is a sense of stability that comes from knowing exactly who you are and how you want to live. The problem is that many relationships require constant adjustment. At first, those adjustments seem harmless. You change a few routines, give up a little time, alter a few habits, and make small compromises to keep the relationship running smoothly. That sounds reasonable, and sometimes it is. But when those compromises become one-sided, something begins to change. Little by little, you start filtering your thoughts to avoid disagreements. You stop doing certain activities because they create tension. You spend less time on hobbies you enjoy and more time managing expectations. The independent man who once felt grounded begins organizing his life around keeping someone else happy. This is where many older men lose something they spent decades building, themselves. The saddest part is that they often mistake this sacrifice for love. They convince themselves that giving up pieces of their identity is the price of companionship. But true companionship should support who you are, not require you to become someone else. And once a man starts losing himself, he becomes easier to influence, easier to control, and more willing to tolerate situations that do not serve his well-being. That is why the most fulfilled men over 60 approach relationships very differently from everyone else. The most fulfilled men over 60 are not necessarily the richest men, the most attractive men, or even the men with the largest social circles. More often than not, they are the men who have learned to become extremely selective about who and what they allow into their lives. They understand something that takes many people an entire lifetime to learn. Every person who enters your life will either contribute to your well-being or quietly subtract from it. These men no longer make decisions based on loneliness, attraction, or the fear of being alone. They make decisions based on compatibility, peace of mind, and the quality of their daily experience. They ask different questions than younger men. Instead of asking, do I like her? They ask, does this relationship make my life better? Instead of asking, am I attracted to her? They ask, how do I feel after spending time with her? Those questions often reveal far more than emotions ever could. The wisest older men also understand that companionship does not have to come wrapped in romantic expectations. Some of the strongest connections in life come through friendships, community, shared interests, family relationships, and meaningful conversations with people who genuinely respect your boundaries. These relationships often provide connection without the emotional complications, financial pressures, and constant demands that can accompany romantic involvement. Most importantly, fulfilled men protect their energy with the same seriousness they once protected their income. They recognize that time is limited, health is precious, and emotional stability is difficult to rebuild once it is lost. That is why they become highly selective about who receives access to their lives, and that selectiveness eventually leads to a powerful realization, one that changes how a man views relationships, happiness, and fulfillment altogether. The greatest lesson many men learn after 60 is that fulfillment and freedom are not the same as romance. Society spends decades convincing men that happiness is found through relationships, but age has a way of exposing what truly matters. By this stage of life, most men have already experienced love, heartbreak, commitment, sacrifice, responsibility, and loss. They no longer need fantasies, they need reality. And the reality is that the most content men are often the ones who have built a life they genuinely enjoy waking up to each morning. They have routines that keep them active, friendships that keep them connected, interests that keep them engaged, and a sense of purpose that gives meaning to their days. They are not sitting around waiting for someone to rescue them from boredom or loneliness because they have already created a life worth living. This is why they are so careful about relationships. They understand that anyone entering their life should add value rather than create pressure. They know that companionship should feel peaceful, not exhausting, supportive, not demanding, liberating, not restrictive. If a relationship requires them to sacrifice their health, finances, freedom, identity, or emotional stability, they no longer see it as a blessing. They see it as a cost. That doesn't mean every girlfriend after 60 is a mistake. It means every relationship should be evaluated honestly rather than emotionally. The older and wiser a man becomes, the more he realizes that protecting his peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Because after 60, the real goal is not finding someone to complete your life. The real goal is making sure no one disrupts the life you've worked so hard to build. At the end of the day, every man must make his own choices. But after 60, wisdom means understanding that your time is limited, your energy is valuable, and your peace is worth protecting. The wrong relationship can quietly take away the freedom, stability, and happiness you've spent a lifetime building. The right relationship may add value, but it should never come at the cost of your well-being. Always ask yourself one simple question. Does this person bring peace into my life or pressure? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more life lessons and relationship insights. And tell me in the comments, do you believe a girlfriend after 60 adds happiness or creates more problems? I'd love to hear your thoughts.